Hello, welcome to A Lesson Before Writing, episode 19. I'm Ted Morrissey here with my co hosts, Brady Harrison. This is Brady's most recent book that we've published, The Term Between, but we are on the brink of bringing out A Journey to Al Ramel, his debut novel. In fact, we floated the cover a few days ago on social media, so look that up if nothing else. And then also here with Grant Tracy, and not quite out yet. But here's the proof copy of A Shoe Shine Kill. We did talk a little bit about this in our last episode. We talked about the cover, et cetera, et cetera. But Shoe Shine Kill, set 1972, the summit series between Canada and the Soviet Union. I'm not going to let Grant give a synopsis because 20 minutes later I'll have to stop him talking about hockey. But anyway, proofreading this right now, and that's a slow process for me. I'm a slow reader anyway, but I'm going through it with a fine-tooth comb, and it's great. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just checking and double checking. Again, it's historical fiction, so that I'm constantly like reading a page and then stopping and going to my laptop to look up, is that really the way things were in 1972 or whatever? So anyway, look for that very soon though, and A Journey to Al Ramel. So Grant, I appreciate your patience. I know you I've had this proof in hand since before Christmas. And I don't know if you've been wondering what's going on with it, but I am reading it just very, very slowly. So I know you haven't been twiddling your thumbs; you've been doing other stuff. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Have you thought much about the book in the meantime, or is your head just completely on to other
No,
projects?
well, it's. I'm not trying to brag, or I don't know how to explain it, Ted. Like I'm going to get some reading set up. I've already been talking to some people and try to get a reading at the local bookstore and at the library, and then obviously on campus. But there's a moment in the new Bob Dylan film, which I absolutely love, by the way, Timothy Chalamet. But there's this moment where Joan Baez is wanting to do all the old songs, and Bob's like, no. And he even turns her back on her, and he wants to do new songs, not, and there's a little bit of that feeling like this book now is like a couple of years old, and I'm like excited to get it out in the world, but I'm excited about the other book that I've finished, and the new book that I'm thinking about. So I can really understand how musicians kind of got to do that set list thing and do the songs that the audience wants to hear, but at the same time, I want to, sing some songs that aren't on the new album, but are on the next album. And, and every once in a while they'll sing a couple, but, yeah. So anyway, that's just kind of where my head's at, but I'm really excited to promote the book. And if you guys can help me with this, I want to get anybody out there in TV land, Ron McLean's address. I want to send him a copy. I just think he would love this book. We're born the same year, 1960, and he's a host of Hockey Night in Canada on Saturdays, and I dig him. I've been watching him for years. So anyway, I want him to get a copy. I want to get a copy in his hands so he can read it. It's not about, then he'll have me on Hockey Night in Canada. That would be awesome. But no, the point is, I want him to read it. I think he would love it.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great idea, and I've thought about we need to be sending your books out. For the last few years, I've been periodically sending my books to like university libraries around the world, and sometimes they disappear, never to be heard from again. But on the other hand, a lot of times libraries will actually add them to their collections, and part of what I'm doing is trying to kind of seed some interest. I've discovered that there's a lot more interest in my work now. That's all relative. There's not a lot of interest in my work anywhere, but there's more interest in other countries than there is here in the U.S. And so I'll just mention, for example, that I sent some books to Singapore about a month ago, and I got an email that they're going to add Mrs. Seville and Crow Song for the Stricken. Now, there were some other books I sent them, which they decided not to add to their collection, but I'm thrilled that those books are going to be in the National University of Singapore, which is a tremendous library. Actually was there a couple of years ago during a conference, so that even kind of adds to the thrill of it. So because of that, I've got books, on basically every continent. Now, whether everyone's reading them or not, I don't know. But, I'm kind of trying to seed some interest, if not now, maybe in some future generation, someone will find it on the shelf and read it. I gave that lecture to students and faculty in Islamabad back in November, And the students then wrote an analysis of my story, Vox Humana, and they've been sending them to me. And I've been thrilled to get them and to read what they have to say. And they see the story as a much more sophisticated story than what I ever thought it was. But it actually kind of changed my opinion of it, because then in the meantime, I was contacted by an editor who's putting together an anthology and asked me just to send them a short story, whatever story I wanted. And so I sent them my story, Vox Humana. And part of it is because my own opinion of the story has risen as a result of reading these students what they had to say about it. So I don't know. It's a complicated thing how we feel about our own work and what we do with it, and that kind of thing. Brady, I haven't gotten you in the conversation yet, so I don't know. Do you want to comment on any of that we've just talked about, or anything else for that matter?
Oh, well, it is my secret wish, and so I suppose saying it aloud is not a good idea. But I'm hoping that A Journey to Al Ramel will somehow one day find some readers in France, because the protagonist is French and from Paris, and I was very deliberate. Like, there was particular reasons why I chose that. So I hope the new book will find readers here, but also let's send some copies across the way.
Right. Well, I've written about this, and I don't think I've talked about it expressly in our podcast, but it's expensive to ship books to Pakistan or to Singapore or to China or some of those places. But what I discovered was, I don't know, gosh, I don't know what year, maybe 2021 to 2023 or something. For the first time in my life, I actually had a little bit of liquid cash. The kids were all grown and out of college, and I was remarried to someone who actually made money instead of just costing me money. Not that I'm bitter, but anyway, I had a little bit of money. So for the first time, I was able to promote my writing, and that was partly, reviews. It was contests, and in both cases, I did, really, I'm pretty proud of how that turned out. And then also, there's all these book promoters out there. So as soon as you publish a book, you guys have probably been contacted by somebody who's with some organization, and they've got a website, and they've got this, and they've got that. If you give them a certain amount of money, they'll promote your book, and you'll be, a best-selling author, blah, blah, blah. And I did some of that. I did some of that. And again, they're legit. It's not scams. There's plenty of that going on too. They really do what they promise to do. But anyway, over about a 3-year period, I figure I spent roughly about $25,000 promoting my books. And that resulted in approximately $20 worth of book sales. I mean, it just went out and absolutely nothing in return. And and I'll when I have a book come out, I'll put it all over social media, and of course, all my friends, quote unquote, on social media will like it, blah blah blah. But no one will purchase a copy. And so I don't know, it's just really, really hard. So anyway, the bottom line here is I've kind of decided I still want to get reviews, because it's nice to at least have somebody read your book, and I'll enter some contests. But in terms of that promotional stuff, I'd rather spend $90 sending a box of books to Singapore than give some dude $90 to promote my book for no particular purpose, apparently, in the US. I'm just not writing the kind of stuff, apparently, that is bad enough that people want to read, So anyway, that's just kind of where I've been at for the last, few years or whatever. It's just a tricky thing. So I hope you're right, Brady. Obviously, as your publisher, I definitely hope you're right, that A Journey to Al Ramel really can catch fire, and that people will read it, and that kind of thing. It just, obviously, Grant's books are great, and I don't know why they aren't being read more voraciously. And I think Grant's series would make a great mini series, or a streaming series on Netflix or something. I mean, ex hockey player turned private eye, and all these cool adventures that he goes on. I mean, to me, it's just tailor made for adaptation to either the big screen or the small screen, or whatever. And I really hope that can happen one day eventually too. So Grant, maybe if we get a hold of the address you're hoping to find, maybe that'll be the key. And, and why one book catches fire and why another doesn't. We've kind of talked about this before. Who knows? I love to read older books published mid-century and lit journals, and you read them and it's got names of authors and names of books that are at the time just very, very all sorts of esteem and great quotes and reviews. And then it's like, I've never heard of this guy or this book or whatever. So, all right. I don't know, any responses to any of that, or do you want to move on to some of our topics we thought we might want to touch on today?
Well, just real quickly, Brady, you'll dig this. Albert Camus, the great French philosopher, writer, was a major influence on James Dean. I just read a biography on Dean. The way he would have a cigarette, Dean looked at picture after picture of Camus to try to butch himself up because he was gay, and make himself look tougher. And so the whole Dean and the cigarette, French inspired. So just wanted to throw that out there for you.
There you go.
Well, thanks, Grant. Yeah, well, Camus was pretty cool. I've said this to Ted, and I don't know, Grant, if I've said this to you, but one of the mysteries of the publishing world and of our own experiences and the experiences of 12 Winters is that Grant's Hayden Fuller mystery series should be floating the whole works. You should.
That was the plan. Damn it.
Yeah. Davenport told me one time, and I don't know how true this is, but I think I've shared it with you guys, that with the hard case imprint, that with those great lurid, 50s style, 40s, 50s style covers. Steve made the point, and again, I don't know how true it is, that when Stephen King joined that imprint, that floated everything. That kept everybody else going. And I am astonished that the Hayden Fuller mystery series has not been picked up for television or individual books for films. And so I have my fingers crossed yet, Grant, that break is ahead. Those books are so good and have such appeal. Yeah, I think you're on the verge of great things. This new book is going to be the one.
Well, it's an interesting topic. Brady you and I talked before Grant came on board, and we pressed record. We didn't want to turn this into too depressing of an episode or whatever. But there certainly is this thing afoot that men are not reading fiction as much as women are. I mean, that's just a thing. You can find all kinds of information online about that and so on. And women probably are not inclined to want to read about a detective who used to play hockey, in the 1960s and stuff. They want romance. They want, mysteries, marital discord mysteries kinds of things. In fact, it's my understanding that literary agents can't even get editors at major publishers to read a novel manuscript by a young male author, because there's just no point in reading it, because there's no point in publishing it, because not enough people are going to read it to make it worthwhile, and so that changing demographic where fewer and fewer people are reading, and almost everyone who is reading is female, and they want certain kinds of books, compared to what male readers may want. And then from my experience as a librarian, this is borne out. What males are reading are older males, our age basically. And the ones like who want mysteries, they want the same writers they've always read. They want Tom Clancy, they want Clive Cussler, they want X, Y, and Z. And their publishers have kept publishing them beyond the grave. I mean, there's a bunch of writers who have died, Robert Parker, et cetera. And their publishers have found other writers to keep writing the series. And so the books will arrive almost weekly, and it'll say, Tom Clancy, blah, blah, blah. And then a little print on the bottom is the actual author. I mean, I talk to patrons checking those books out who have no idea that their favorite author died 5 years ago because they've been reading new books by that author for, every week practically or every month practically for the last 5 years. So I don't know. That's another part of it, just the dynamic of who's reading and then how that impacts publishers and the kinds of authors and the kinds of books they're willing to promote. Yeah. I've left you speechless. Well, I'll add to the mix. I saw a YouTuber who does. He talked about contemporary fiction, and she pointed out that the New York Times, they did like the top 5, the best books, best novels of 2024, and the best nonfiction books of 2024, and all 5 of the novels were published by either Penguin Random House or one of their imprints, and 3 of the 5 nonfiction books were published by Penguin Random House or one of their imprints. Then the other 2, one was like from Norton, which is employee owned, but still obviously a big publisher. And then I forget the other one. But so the YouTuber kind of asked the question: are these really the best books of 2024, or are these just the books that reviewers at the New York Times actually knew of because Penguin Random House has the deep pockets to promote their books and to advertise their books and that kind of thing? So this whole business of the best books of whatever year is kind of it's a misnomer, because it's really the most known book, the best advertised books or something of 2024. So I don't know, Grant, you're kind of nodding there. Is that? Do you talk to your students about sort of the difficulties of being a writer in our current climate, or not?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've discovered, and maybe I'm wrong about this, at least when I was writing literary fiction, it seemed that the editors that were picking up my work were women more than men. But now that I've been writing crime stuff, most of the editors that have taken my stuff have been men. So that's interesting in and of itself. I mean, I've had a lot of pubs with really small places or inside a book with several other writers, they put out a call, Wicked Shadow Press or something, but it's a male editor that took my work. So yeah, I mean, I would love to be back in the 1950s when there was Mickey Spillane and being a paperback writer, and that was all these male writers that I like Jim Thompson and the Mick were selling copy after copy after copy with gold medal and these little lurid, Brady was talking about earlier, those lurid paperbacks that men were reading, pocketbooks, they'd pick up at the drugstore and stuff. But yeah, the demographics have shifted, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, James Joyce, when he was working on Finnegan's Wake, he would negotiate with editors to publish excerpts of that, and he would negotiate for more money. He wanted more money, for his. People couldn't even understand this stuff, and they were still paying, top dollar for excerpts of Finnegan's Wake, and that's just. And I remember, I got into kind of a Sylvia Plath phase for a while, and I was teaching some of her stuff and some courses at local university I taught at. And so I was reading a lot about her and her journals and letters and things. And when she was graduating from college, her mom was worried about what she was going to do to make a living because, she was this, a poet, and wasn't about to get married to anybody, which was a problem in the 50s. And she said, oh, don't worry, Mom. I can always just, write stories and you make money that way, because there were all these magazines, Mademoiselle and Marie Claire and Cosmopolitan, and on and on and on, who paid top dollar for short stories, and so those writers could just crank them out, one after another, and enough to live on. I know I've said before, Kurt Vonnegut was writing ad copy, for General Electric or some corporation like that. But in an 18-month period, he sold 3 science fiction stories and made enough money that he quit his full-time job to write full-time. And he had a wife who didn't work and 6 children that he was supporting. Excuse me. So So back in the 50s, he could make enough money just writing short stories that he could devote himself to full-time writing. It also, I mean, there was no brand new iPhone to get every 18 months, and there was no going to the doctor for a broken bone and having a $5,000 medical bill, even though you have insurance, and so life was different back in the 50s as well. So yeah, Brady, I haven't got you in on the conversation for a while. Do you have anything to add to that, or can you find a silver lining in any of that?
Oh, a silver lining, no. But what concerns me, the matter of who reads and who's reading what kind of work. I mean, of course, we're deeply interested in that, and we want to reach as many readers as we can. But I'm also concerned at professionally in my day job that young men are not going to college. Young men are not getting higher education. And we can see, I think, some of the implications and ripple effects of that prolonged phenomenon in certain, shall we say, voting patterns and certain turns in the culture. And so I think actually the stakes are very high. We're talking about we would like to reach readers, and we're talking about how do we get market share and how do we get attention, and how do Grant's books sort of indirectly sustain our venture, Ted's venture in 12 Winters. But the more profound matter going on out there, that we need to pay more attention. We need to, in a funny sort of way, we need to be more inclusive in education and in getting folks hopefully to read. Okay, I'll stop proselytizing.
No, that's it. Oh, go ahead, Grant.
No, I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with you. And I think there's something lost in, I'm an English professor, and my class, except for my film classes, because I pull students from communication studies and elsewhere on campus, are predominantly women. And I don't have a problem with that per se, because I actually enjoy the company of women more than I do men. That's just kind of, how I roll, to be honest. But I don't want my profession to become so female dominated that it's like back in the 70s, I had a friend who was a dancer, and there were like maybe 2 males in the dance academy, and the rest were women. I mean, I think those diversity of voices are important in the classroom and in the discipline, in terms of, what gets put forward as critical discourse. And so it's a concern of mine that, my department right now has more women professors than male professors, which I think in some ways is a good thing. But I worry, like in 25 years, it's going to be like the dance academy example. It'll be, two dudes and the rest. It's like social work. My daughter's got a degree in social work. All her professors were women. All of the students were women. There was like 1 or 2 token guys in the program at Iowa, and then later at Loyola, where she got her MSW. She got a BSW at Iowa and an MS. And I'm like, the social work would have been a program I would have loved to have gotten into. It's something I actually thought about in the late 70s. I even took a few classes, at Trent University, but I ended up, I always loved English literature and history. So my larger point is I just think diversity all around is good everywhere. And I don't think any field should get too top heavy with, whiteness or women or whatever. That's just my feeling about it. It makes
I think we should be as educating and making available higher education to as many people as we can. Pink, blue, green, dudes, whatever. It has to be, I think, available to as many people as possible. I think that serves a profound cultural world interests, future interests.
Well, yeah, obviously this we could start a whole new podcast series on this topic, but I'll mention that my dude William Gass. I mean, he was talking about this back in the 70s, and 80s. He was a prophet at Washington University. He gave graduation, commencement addresses, and all kinds of stuff. And he already saw it happening then that college students, weren't reading, and therefore they weren't reading very well, and what that kind of portended for us as a society. It's funny. He was really, really good friends with William Gaddis, the author of The Recognitions and JR and on and on and on. And they didn't meet till the 70s, but they both started kind of publishing in the 50s and 60s. But they both had very similar sort of trajectories in terms of how they viewed their work, but also writing fiction in general. If you go back to their earliest days, they both were very optimistic about how literature could improve humanity, could improve society, etc. But then by the end of their careers, and Gaddis died, I think, 98, they still believed that literature could do that, but they also realized, well, people have to read it first, and no one's reading it. And so there still is that potential for great books changing minds in productive ways and changing consciousness in productive ways. But if you can't get people to read the books, then obviously that ain't going to happen. It's like, the vaccine sitting in the fridge isn't going to help. You got to actually get it in people's arms, and of course that's a whole nother can of worms now. But yeah, I mentioned to Brady before we hit record that I was watching this interview with John Barth from the early 2000s, and he said something really interesting, which I think is still kind of true today, but maybe not in quite the way he meant it. But he was talking about the fact the interviewers were asking him, is he disappointed in the fact that he spent all this time writing this new book? It was Coming Soon with 3 exclamation points. That was the new book that was out. And he was like, he spent all this time writing it. And it's this really great, complicated, sophisticated book. And so few people are going to be reading it. And he said, well, yeah, but he kind of figured that there were 2 kinds of writers. There were writers who were writing popular fiction, and they were going to get a lot of readers like right now. But then like in 6 months or a year, who's going to be reading them? And then there's writers like him who are writing these more challenging books who don't get a whole lot of readers right now, but over the next 20, 25 years, how many people are going to be reading them? And he goes, obviously the first group, their checking account, benefits now, whereas he's not really going to see the benefits of somebody reading slowly over time. But I think we're kind of there now, except that I don't know that we have a lot of popular writers who are, and Barth's point was that because of the popular writers, that gave him the time and the space to write the stuff he did. And but now I don't know that publishers, well, I know publishers don't work that way anymore. It used to be that, yeah, one really successful series could float an entire publishing house, so you could publish the more erudite, less popular authors. But then with the corporate entertainment, megalopolis kind of companies coming along, they kind of changed that, and every book was kind of for itself, and it had to make money on its own, and there was no longer going to be a book that made money, so you could have your Cormac McCarthy's and your John Barths and your William Gasses and so forth. So that definitely changed. By the way, if you go to tedmorsey.blog, you can find conference papers I've given on that topic. You can read there. So anyway, well, we said we want to talk about something else, so let's talk about it. Grant had floated the idea of talking about AI and using AI to help someone write fiction and the ethical aspect of that, I guess. And then I had been thinking about talking about endings, which is by far the hardest part of a narrative to get right, I think. And so we thought maybe somehow we could kind of combine those two. But let's get on to the AI conversation. Grant, what did you want to talk about in terms of AI, artificial?
Well, I guess I want to be really careful with what I say, because we're still at the early stage of this, and I am a believer in humanity and human beings creating art. But I also think for those that who maybe don't have a connection to close friends and they want to get feedback on a story, I wouldn't use AI to write sentences. That to me is a no-no. And I wouldn't use AI to write a plot because I'm a plotter. And to me, that's like writing. To me, that's I have a little bit of a problem with Shakespeare. Okay. He borrowed plots from else, but he's a great writer. Now, and that's probably the filmic side of me because in film land, the plot's the main thing in terms of getting writing credit. But anyway, I wouldn't want you to get a plot from AI, but let's say you get done with the story and you want to say, what are some things here that I could improve upon? You put the story through AI, and AI will give you a bunch of suggestions. And there's certain levels. So then you get the suggestions, and maybe there's 10 or 12 suggestions, and you take one or two of them. The danger is then asking it, well, because it always says, would you like me to further? And then you could say yes, and then it'll write you sentences. And I think that's, for me, the ethical divide. Stay away from that. But that's up to each individual, I guess. I'm very troubled by that. But getting a few suggestions, I mean, I can remember when people thought going to the writing lab to have a paper helped with by a tutor was cheating. And now professors allow it all the time. And so my thought is, if it's going to make your story better, that's okay. But it's a gray line, and you got to be careful. Like, I ran a story of my own through AI just to see how it rolled. And it came up with a bunch of suggestions. And one of the problems in the suggestions was the plotting that it was saying I could do more with was a little too neat. I like loose strings. I like things not all solved. And it even created an ending that was right out of TV movie of the week land, like really bad writing. And I have enough, strength in my own ego and value system as an artist. I was able to look at that and say, this is all wrong. This isn't going to work. But then at a couple other points where basically took something I already had and said, you could do more with this, and suggested some things. I'm like, oh, that's a good plot point. And that's the kind of stuff my friends do when they look at my work, Mark Dickinson or Jeremy Schraffenberger, and they'll say, hey, you got this thing here, maybe do a little bit more with this variable. You got something happening here. I find this interesting. And it's like, ooh, thank you for that. And so then I'll use it. One last thing. When I was in workshop, I had a professor that was very prescriptive. And I remember one of my stories, I was writing about alienated youth, trying to write literary fiction. So it was a bunch of boys, about 14 years old, playing football with a pee-wee football on a hill. And all around them, this construction's happening, and the world is changing. And it's all, so it's an obvious metaphor about the boys going through puberty and their change. Anyway, I have this whole, and I have different kinds of characters. The nerd, it was shit. Okay, it was bad, but I thought it was brilliant at the time. And I put it up for workshop, and my professor, Steve Heller, he's like, talking about the thing, and there were a lot of things he admired about it, but he thought it was sentimental and had problems with tone. And then he suggested an ending. He said, Grant, this is too sentimental. I want something tough at the end, like the last line should be "fuck football." And I was aghast. At the same time, I thought, oh, he's the professor. So I put in that ending, and then like months later, I'm like, that doesn't work. That's not my voice. That's not my sense of the world. It's not my vision. And so eventually, as I revised the story, I got rid of "fuck football." But he put that on my manuscript. Like, he wrote the ending for me. And I got real problems with that. And I have problems with that with AI. So what I'm saying is a little mumbly jumbly here, but I think it can be used as a tool, but you have to be careful. One last thing. My wife showed me a meme yesterday. It was hilarious. It was a young woman, kind of blondish brown hair, in clothing right out of an LL Bean catalog, created by AI. she's out in the woods and she's got a fire going. And she's sitting there in her, did you see this, Brady? And she's sitting there, and then there's a little pup tent, and the fire's inside the pup tent. And so that, I think, explains the dangers of AI. Okay, I'm going to shut up now. I think I put enough stuff out there for you guys to like thrust and parry. So take it away.
Great. I've got some stuff, some thoughts on that. But Brady, what are you thinking?
Oh, well.
Let it all hang out, brother. I want to hear.
As I may have mentioned along the way, I'm sort of addicted to reading primarily work written for laypersons, but also I read scientific articles on quantum physics. Like I just have this weird obsession and have for many, many years. And so some of the stuff I've been reading lately and listening to scientists talk, they think it's possible that not very far into the future that AI will be a lot smarter than we are. And so we don't want to always sort of be, gloomy and afraid. And I don't know where this is all going to go, but I'm sort of rather fearful of AI. And so I myself don't want to know anything about it, but I'm just old and square, and I want to just do my own thing. But I think I have mentioned this perhaps even to you guys, but in seminar last semester on the contemporary novel, we read a Stephen Graham Jones novel, The Old Good Indian. And he makes reference, the characters make reference to some fantasy novels. And I didn't know what those were. I don't read a lot of high fantasy. And so the character had only described the plot. So I typed the plot in, and what AI gave me back in that process were plot suggestions for a high fantasy series, say 10 books, and it furnished all the plots and the characters. And I hadn't even really asked for that. And it looked to me, just as Grant said, just like this kind of cookie cutter, like it sort of made me sad to see how readily this could produce. And I think if I'd asked it, it would have written those books in about a minute. The 10 series, each one 1,000 pages. So I don't know where this is all going to go, and I don't really have any answers or any opinions even on the matter of Grant, the running one's own story through and seeing what kind of feedback we would get, the same as we would get feedback from anybody. But yeah, I'm afraid of it, and I'm just hiding. So I'm not brave. I suppose the last thing I'll say is in my professional, in my daily life, the amount of work that I'm reading that's generated by AI, it's discouraging. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that is coloring what I'm about to say is I have a little bit different view of working through drafts than what Grant does. I don't want to share my work with anybody. I've had other writers, offer, and readers offer to read, some of my drafts, give me some feedback. Like, I don't want your fucking feedback. This is my story, this is my novel, this is my poem, this is my whatever. If it sucks, then so be it. I'll find out when no one will publish it. But I have no interest in anybody having a hand in what I am creating. And so I don't want a human hand. I certainly don't want, a cyborg hand or a robotic hand in that. But I have a lot of students, a lot of my MFA students, et cetera, who they really take a shine to the workshop process, and they feel like beyond their degree, they need to have a writing group that they share their work with. And and I don't discourage it, because one thing, it may keep them writing. And we know a lot of MFA grads, finish their degree and then never write another word. But that's okay. I mean, if people feel I need feedback, so I'm not saying that's wrong. And maybe my work would be better if I was getting feedback. But part of it is I see it as art. And I think art should be a representation of the artist, not the artist plus five other people who gave commentary on it or whatever. So yeah, so I don't want any feedback from anybody, including AI. But getting back to what Brady had said, I fully expect that in the not the next couple of years, maybe. I mean, it's already starting to happen, but I mean, there's ebooks that are fully written by AI, et cetera. But the major publishers, and there's only like four, maybe five left in the U.S., depending on how you define major. Um, how much better will it make their lives, the shareholders' lives, once AI will just generate the books, and then you won't have to put up with I don't know, paying royalties, or you know you know human authors who get blocked, or who have to go to rehab, and so they can't meet their deadline or whatever. And so why not? Yeah. And the best-selling authors now write formulaic, repetitive crap anyway. That's what the few readers who are left, at least that's from my perch, the few readers who are left, that's mainly what they want to read. They want to read the Colleen Hoovers and the Frida McFaddens, and they want to read the easy plot devices and blah blah blah. So why not have maybe James Patterson can get to the point where he's publishing 10 books a week instead of only 5, if they just have the James Patterson AI write the books or whatever. So anyway, I don't see it as writing. I don't see it as being creative at all. But yet I see the handwriting on the wall, and that we're already probably down that, sliding down that slippery slope even as we speak today. And we're going to hit bottom, maybe next week sometime, if not next year, the year after, or whatever. I'm going to, maybe this is a glimmer of hope, or maybe it's a glimmer of even more dark and depressive topic. But I had this revelation or realization or something over the last few weeks, kind of over Christmas break. I had a little bit of a break in the nonstop grading of papers and replying to student emails and yada yada yada. And so I had this revelation. We are kind of living at a golden age of creative writing. I don't know if there's ever been a time in human history when more great writers were writing great stuff. And part of what got me thinking, I've just kind of finished 2 semesters back to back with some MFA students, and yeah, some of their projects were not great, but this last round particularly, I mean, I had 4 or 5 students who produced some work that was very, very good, just astonishingly good in my humble opinion, and should be published. And I hope it is published. Now, probably will have to be self-published, but whatever. One of them made a pitch for me to publish it with 12 Winters, which I appreciated their pluck, but I turned them down, not because it didn't deserve to be published, but I've got my hands full. But anyway, so I think we're living at kind of a time when there's more great writing being produced, but it's ironically at also a time when almost no one is reading it. I mean, we're in a few minutes here, we're going to start talking about a story that's in Michigan Quarterly Review. And there are thousands of literary journals and small presses that are pumping out great work just day after day after day. It's just that hardly anyone is reading it, but I don't know. There are so many, creative writing programs and MFA programs and great instructors like Grant and me who are teaching those students. I think we're living at a really unique time in terms of the amount of really great work being published. It's just a shame hardly anyone is reading it. Grant, what do you think? Do you think it's an overstatement to say we're kind of in a golden age of creative writing, even if we're not in a golden age of reading creative writing?
Not at all. I mean, our most popular classes are creative writing classes at UNI in terms of in the languages and literature. I mean, I don't think I'm making that up. We have a lot of students that take those classes that they're lit majors or they're future teachers, but they, I mean, when I went to Trent, there wasn't even a creative writing class. I mean, Canada was a little bit behind in some ways from the idea of the U.S. workshop, and Trent was a small university of 2,400 students at the time. But I remember every once in a while I would just approach professors and say, hey, for this Hemingway thing, can I write some, and the professors were pretty cool. They'd say, yeah, sure. So I wrote these little short things that were riffing on like the In Our Time little bridges between stories, and they loved them. And then in a history class, I got to write a play on slavery, allegory, and which long as it was grounded in research. So that I had some pretty cool props, but there was none of that. And now I'm seeing, and I'm not at a Research One school, but I am seeing in our lit classes, we're letting students, like in my film class, I let students make films. So I had a student make a Buster Keaton type film. Instead of writing a paper on Buster Keaton, he did this marvelous little 5-minute film on an iPhone, and turned that in. And we got an A. It was fantastic. I loved it. And it was a silent movie. And he even had the Keaton look. In terms of looking at the camera, befuddled, trying to figure out the universe. So I think creative writing has seeped into, like, I can remember being in a lit class and talking about Joseph Conrad and going on and on about film noir. And the professor said to me, "You're thinking like a creative writer." Like, basically told me to stop and wanted me to think like a lit guy. And I think I've always thought like a creative writer. I just didn't get full permission to think that way. So now when I read, I'm always talking craft with my students. When I read a work of literature, it's about the craft. It's not necessarily about the ideas or geopolitical stuff or whatever. And that's okay. I mean, that's what critics do. And I respect that. And I read a lot of that stuff. But that's when I'm reading something, I want to see how it's put together and why certain language choices are made. So yeah, I think we're definitely in a golden time, and I've had so much great work by students. Then it lifts me up. It inspires me to keep writing because I enjoy teaching because I get to read so much good stuff. So totally agree with you on that. The other thing I would say is I'm on board with you in terms of workshop. As a teacher, I do not give students endings. I do not write endings for them. Or, for me, it's like I will do what I said the AI does, which is you really got this interesting thing, this thing with the father, and you mentioned something about, I don't know, that's interesting. Maybe think about that, or this over here is interesting. And that may be something like something that's in the background that maybe you can bring in the foreground on just thinking about it, not saying do it, just think about it. It's intriguing. So most of my feedback is what's working and then in terms of what's not working or what you haven't executed well, but I don't tell them how to do it because I agree with you. It says my name on the story, not Grant Tracy and 5 workshop members. However, when I'm really stuck on a story that I love, that's when I will send it to friends like Jeremy or Mark and say, I've been working on this for 2 years. I don't know what's wrong with it. And then they'll fire back with a bunch of stuff. And then it's like, ding, ding, ding. And then, because I believe in being a romantic artist, I will try to find another way to do what they've suggested, but make it mine, if that makes sense. So that's kind of some of my philosophy. But I think AI can be a tool for those that really love the workshop model in terms of collaboration. And I mean, there's all kinds of collaboration in the writing world. I remember talking to Benjamin Percy at a conference, and they took all these agents. They took a third of his novel and told him to cut it. Got rid of it. Tom Drury, another writer, I met him in Iowa. He wrote a novel called The Driftless Area, and he said to me, "Grant, my wife liked the original version better than this one, but my agent made me rewrite it." Catch-22. The original title of that by Joseph Heller was Catch-18. That does not sound very catchy to me. I mean, think about how Catch-22 has become part of our language discourse. That was an editor that suggested changing the title. Do they have their name on the book? No. So, I mean, within the traditions of the art of writing, we go on Gordon Lish and Raymond Carver. I actually like the Raymond Carver bloated stories equally well as the Lish truncated ones, but it doesn't have Lish's name on it. So through the 20th century of Paris, Bray was talking earlier, Fitzgerald, Morley Callahan, Ernest Hemingway. There was a writer's workshop, and they were commenting on each other's manuscripts while they were sending them out. So there's always been within the art of writing, Dorothy Parker and the Vicious Circle. There's always been groups of people that Max Perkins. I could go on and on. So there's been collaboration. It just doesn't get acknowledged as such. And so AI is a form of collaboration. But I, like Brady, have my druthers, and I'm and like you, Ted, I'm concerned that at some point they won't have to deal with us needy writers. They'll just pump out these schlocky. They already are pumping out some schlocky stuff, Mr. Jim Patterson. So anyway, that's my Clive Cussler. That's my take on it. I think it's complex. It's not an easy just. People are going to use it, is what I'm saying, and some magazines that pay are even making you have to say you didn't use it. Now, what do we mean by use? Like what I did, ran a story through there and got some feedback, and then saw a couple of plot points I could do more with. Does that mean then that I used AI, or is that a different from, yeah, this whole paragraph we could see you didn't even write these sentences. You see what I'm it becomes muddy, and it's going to get muddier as we move forward. And I do have ethical concerns, but at the same time, I think it can be helpful to writers.
All right.
Not quite for me.
Brady, what are your, I know you don't teach creative writing, but you're obviously there in Missoula. You're rubbing elbows with creative writing teachers and MFA students. I know you've read with some MFA students yourself in not too distant past year. What are some of your thoughts on the golden age of creative writing, or anything else you want to comment on?
Oh yeah, I despite our having today leaned into some gloom and doom, I think we live at a very great time. And at the University of Montana, the creative writing program is so vibrant, so dynamic, but also the MA program has some great faculty and has great students doing very serious work. And so despite the all the concerns, I do think the work being done both by creative writers and by scholars, I'm seeing only first-rate work. I mean, of course, in some large undergraduate classes, some AI living in some superheated space is writing the papers. That's going on. But yeah, the MFA students and MA students, I am astonished at how great they are and how smart they are and how agile their minds are and how great often their writing in both disciplines can be. And we have some students who are in both programs, MA and MFA.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Well, I want to get on to our featured story, but I will just, maybe as kind of the final word on this topic, not that there's more we couldn't say, but, I'm going to go to the 17th International Conference on the Short Story in English in June in Killarney, Ireland. But I'd gone there 2 years ago to Singapore for the conference. It kind of moves around the globe every 2 years. And, again, in English. So, but if you look at the writers who are going to be there, it's a multinational group to be sure. And so, here in the West, when we're writing in English, as we are trying to get our work out there and published and then read eventually, we're not just competing with, people here in the US or just even in, England and the US. I mean, there are people writing great work all over the world in English that we're also competing with, and that might be actually a really good segue for our featured story. So I think there's a lot more we can say on these topics. We meant to talk about endings, which we didn't really get to at all. And so maybe that'll be a good February topic if we can get around to it. But as our loyal listeners, watchers know, we have a featured story every episode. And this featured story comes out of the winter 2025 issue of Michigan Quarterly Review. And I picked the story out and sent it to these characters. And it's My Left Hand Unholy by Sanja Thakur. And I did listen to a couple of videos. I think I'm fairly close on the name there. but a young, recently graduated MFA student who, has started publishing quite a bit, and we'll talk more about her biography pretty soon here. Let me just read maybe the first couple of paragraphs. They're both very short, and then we'll kind of get into a discussion of My Left Hand Unholy. So it begins. My father's life has always been peripheral to mine. What he wants, who he is loved, none of those things has ever made a difference. He is a foreign object lodged inside my body like a kidney stone. I have spent years trying to flush him out. Her life, though, it matters. I hope I am my mother's child. I see it in the way we gave birth. I've watched the VCR tapes of her in Breach Candy Hospital, 1989. She had a private room, pear green walls. Her mother held her right hand tightly. A nurse wiped her sweaty forehead with a rag soaked in warm water. Her mouth opened up like the maw of a wild boar, her eyes wide and white, but she wasn't afraid. She looked enraged. All right, so again, those are the first couple of paragraphs. And what we encounter in this story is the narrator's mother has passed away. And so the narrator, this young woman, lets family and neighbors know that this death has occurred. And so suddenly all these people are descending upon the apartment where her mother's body lies. And the daughter, then the narrator, has a series of kind of flashbacks and thoughts about her childhood, about her parents, her husband, that she is somewhat estranged from, and so on. And then ultimately kind of the climax of the story, to a degree, or at least building up to that climax, is that my dog wants out. That's the whining you hear in the background. Anyway, very quickly, her mother's body has to be, the clothes taken off and has to be washed. And who is going to do that, and how that process is going to take place is kind of becomes one of the central questions of the story. And anyway, I'll just kind of stop there. My wife to the rescue. She let the dog out. And so, what are some of your thoughts about this little short story that we read? Brady, let me kick it back to you. Let you lead the way here, and some of your thoughts on this short story.
Thank you, Ted. I perhaps don't like this story as well as Ted does, but I admire this story, and it's certainly, I would place it in the tradition of what we used to call the well-made story. It's very, very carefully plotted, and it has its mix of ingredients. This is a writer who's really in pretty absolute command of their material. Myself, I tend to prefer kind of wilder fictions. Grant spoke earlier about the strings left at play. Not everything quite so stitched up, perhaps. But this story succeeds, as I say, a command of details and cultural details, and a story about, kind of, how would one say, a kind of selfish. The narrator has some selfishness and is wondering about their own attachment to family and to their husband, and so the story works through that. I think all quite carefully and quite deliberately, and as I say, in command of the material.
Okay. All right. Grant.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything Brady said. Reminds me of Bob Dylan. Again, I love that movie. And Timothy Chalamet as Dylan at one point says to Joan Baez, "You sing pretty, maybe too pretty." And to come back to Brady's point about careful, it's a little two, like Brady was saying, like everything all fits. So like, I don't want to give away plot points, but I just to make my point. Charles Baxter talks about fiction and the influence of poetry on fiction, and he calls it rhyming action. And there's a series of rhymes throughout the piece that I feel are just a little too telegraphed. Like I know it's going to happen, and then when I see it, I'm like, oh, okay, that's the nuance of consciousness that goes with literary fiction. But so just to make my point, when she's in 8th grade, she gets molested by a couple of fellas that touch her breasts. Later, when she makes love with a stranger, the fella touches her breasts as he's, about to have sex with her. Uh, uh, Later, she wakes up and the fella has picked up her daughter and put the daughter on his chest. And then later, near the end of the story, the her estranged husband has put his head on her chest. And I'm like, okay. I mean, that's just a few too many rhymes for me. But in terms of execution, there's a lot of cool stuff going on with the body in terms of not feeling like it's your own or having control of it. These boys touch her when she's in 8th grade. There's sort of some resent, and I don't know if it was postpartum depression that's at play here, but there's some resentment of the Brady was calling it selfishness, but of the child, and the whole nursing thing that I thought was well nuanced. And then there's just a lot of really, like Brady said, cultural stuff that is intriguing. And there's a kind of specter of whiteness, if you will, even though it's Indian culture. There is a kind of um, awareness of how those bodies are different from white bodies. So the discussion of the hair and that sort of idea of pretty being defined by whiteness as a specter. And I sort of like that. I mean, just to give a quick, there's a moment in the story where she talks about the cleft in the kid's chin being like the fella Vishal, I think it is. And it reminded me of there's a moment in a book on Red Auerbach, the great Boston Celtic coach, general manager, who won tons of championships. But he was Jewish American, and when he first saw his granddaughter, the first words out of his mouth was, "Oh, I guess she's going to need a nose job." That sort of like, come on, Red. Faces change so much, but like that was the first thing he said. Rhinoplasty. It's in that kid's future, and that just shows a kind of Northern European sense of beauty versus Eastern European or Mediterranean beauty. So I like that about the piece. And I thought there was a lot of good defamiliar moments where there were moments of shock value where I felt like, I have certain ideas of femininity, and this thing tramples all over them at times, and I kind of like that. I kind of like getting schooled, like the word fucks appears, and I'm like, okay, yeah, women can say that. Okay, Grant, relax, and there's other moments where it takes a turn where I didn't expect it. Like when she is touched by those 8th grade boys, there's sort of this moment where it's like, oh, no one ever saw me that way or something like that. It's like, is that really what someone would think of this? So I asked my wife and she's like, no. I said, hey, that's the story. I mean, that's this character's reality. So it's defamiliar. And I like those moments. So there's several moments in the piece that are very defamiliarized. It's not just the cultural difference. There's like conscious things that the character thinks that surprised me in wondrous ways. So there is a lot working in this piece, and I want to give it praise for that, even though I think it's just a little too pretty, a little too everything fits.
Yeah. No, I really like this story, and I'll talk more about why. But it's interesting. I feel the same way that I think these characters are really complicated, complex characters, and are doing and saying things that are surprising. Maybe just for some readers, maybe the arc of the story as a whole isn't very shocking or surprising, but the characters, like you say, do things and say things, and yeah, I thought that was a really interesting observation of the narrator. That on the one hand, when she was a kid, she thought it was, inappropriate that her privacy was being violated by these boys. But yeah, it was also thrilling. I think that's the word that she uses. And if a dude wrote this story and said that this girl was molested and found it, an invasion of privacy, but also thrilling, I think they would just get roasted alive. I don't think that's the kind of thing that a male writer could get away with, but a female writer, and then it's an interesting, surprising observation or whatever. And I don't want to get into the gender thing, but I think it does matter whether someone's male or female in terms of what they can kind of get away with in terms of the narrative or whatever.
Well, I think just to interrupt for a second,
Sure.
Ted, I'll let you continue. It's exactly what my wife said. Because I read several passages. I said, "What do you think of this?" She goes, "That's a male writer." I said, "No, it's not." So she even thought it was a male writer because of those moments. So just wanted to throw that in into the hopper, so to speak. Continue.
Yeah. Well, and I told you guys before we hit record that I think one of the reasons I really liked this story and decided to send you this one versus another dozen I was thinking about sending you was, I went through November. I was giving all these kind of remote talks to people in, faculty and students in, first of all, Pakistan, and then Vietnam, and eventually in Iran and Afghanistan. And I said last episode that one of my things is, our governments, and they have all these problems with each other, but as human beings, we're all pretty much on the same page in terms of, what we want out of life, what we want for our children, and as artists, what we're trying to create through our art, etc. And I found it interesting in this story that even though it's this Indian family, and there's this veneer of strangeness for someone like myself who didn't grow up in that culture, but yet beneath that veneer, these are very human characters, and I could very much relate to a lot of what was happening. My own mother passed away not too terribly long ago, just a few years ago, and I didn't get to her in time, and so she was at the hospital. Her body was, and so I sat with her for almost an hour as we waited for the mortuary guys to show up or whatever. So I could very much relate to that experience. Obviously, I didn't wash my mom, but just being with her body, holding her hand, those kinds of things, I could relate to all that. And I think that is true across cultures, regardless of again, kind of the veneer of strangeness or foreignness or whatever. One very technical thing, which also stood out to me, is this story is filled with words I'm not familiar with. The names of Indian dishes, the names of traditions, the gods, I was familiar with the names, but I didn't know a whole lot about, the intricacies of each god and kind of what their purpose was in that, that cosmology or whatever. But yet none of it is italicized. Oftentimes in English, foreign words are italicized, and none of it is italicized. And that would be my inclination too. As you guys know, one of the writers that I published through 12 Winters is John Paul Jaramillo, who grew up in a Latino community in eastern Colorado, grew up speaking Spanish, but a very kind of geographically idiosyncratic, kind of Spanish in his neighborhood. And when I published his first book, it wasn't his first book; it was the first book of his that I published, Little Mocos. That was one of the issues that came up because his previous publisher, who published a collection of short stories, insisted that all the Spanish words be italicized. And so in the original manuscript that John Paul sent me, all of the Spanish words were italicized. And I was like, this is your manuscript, you're the author, but that isn't my inclination. To me, those are just words. We don't need to red flag them as foreign words. And that's actually how he felt about it, but he didn't realize a publisher might agree with him on that. So we went through and took all the italics out. And so then we published, a more recent book of his, Carlos Montoya. Again, lots of Spanish words and Spanish phrases, but none of it is italicized. And this is the same way. I don't know if this author had this kind of conversation with the editors at Michigan Quarterly Review, or if they're all just kind of naturally on the same page. But I see no reason why words need to be identified as foreign by italicizing them. And I like the feel of the text without all those italics in them. You're kind of nodding, Grant, so I'll pick on you. But what's Northern or North American Review's policy regarding those kind of words in stories and poems, et cetera?
100% what you said. I am not for italicizing. However, I will defer to the artist if they, when we start, we had 3 policies on it. Our preference was not to italicize. One policy would be to italicize every international word, unless it was like coup d'etat, something that everybody knows what it means. To italicize all of them. Then another one was the first time it's used, italicize, and then after that, don't. And then the one that I prefer, which has carried over, is you don't italicize anything. But as I've said on a previous broadcast, I leave it to each writer. There was a story. This isn't italics, but it's kind of related. It's Diacritics, story that I published that had Montreal in it, and I suggested putting the accent in Montreal. And the writer said she was Anglophile, living in Montreal, and she felt that would be posing and not. She wasn't comfortable with that idea, and I respected that opinion, and so we did not put. I was being all PC and inclusive, and she was like, "That's." I would just feel like a phony. I said, "That's fine. It's your piece." So, and I just wanted to add one other thing. I think one of the things I admired about this piece, and this is where we're at now, and I think it's really good. Like when Sandra Cisneros was writing in Spanish, like back in whenever like House on Mango Street and Woman Hollering Creek were published, she would often put like a Spanish word like chichi or something, and then explain what it is. For her, because she's always aware of this double voice, like she's writing for 2 cultures. And what I like is that nowadays, when I see stuff with international languages, people aren't doing that anymore, including Cisneros. There's no longer this compulsion to think of the audience as Western and white and having to explain everything. So the writer in this piece drops all these and doesn't, we just have to sort of get it from context and then to look stuff up. It's not like she puts it in there and then right next to it has a positive explaining what it is in English. And I really admire how writers are doing that. It's to make all words equal and not some less than others. So I noticed that about the piece and I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I want to get Brady in here, but that particular thought, I remember when I was reading it, I was like, okay, if this were to ever appear in a Norton anthology, it would just be footnoted like crazy. those Norton editors would be putting like 15 footnotes on every page, just screwing it up. I don't want that. Yeah, Brady, what are your thoughts?
No, I agree completely. The richness of the story and the community that's being represented here is communicated in that language, and so I like that very well. And just to go back to one of the points that Ted was making, this is a story we can all understand. It's in part about desire. It's also about the process of grieving or not grieving, or grieving when the moment to grieve finally lands. So the matter of human experience is pretty central to this story, and I think it works well.
Yeah. Well, let me read Sanjana's little contributors note, and I will mention too that last month we read a story from Bennington Review, which we really we really like Bennington Review, but we took issue with the fact they did not include contributors' notes at all in their issue. You had to scan a QR code to go to the website. In complete contrast, Michigan Quarterly Review puts contributors' notes front and center. So it's actually at the beginning of the book, and it's in really big type. So they're kind of the antithesis of Bennington Review. But here is Sanjana Thakur's contributor's note. Is a writer from Mumbai, India. She is the 2024 winner of the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Her fiction has appeared or is forthcoming in Granta, the Rumpus, and the Southampton Review. Her poetry has been supported by the Bread Loaf Environmental Writers Conference and has appeared or is forthcoming in the Adroit Journal, Booth, and Pigeon Pages. Sanjana is a graduate of University of Texas, Austin's New Writers Project, and Wellesley College. I read elsewhere online that she has degrees in English and anthropology, which I think kind of comes through the anthropology a little bit in this story. And you can find her online in several places. I don't think she has a website per se. I hope that's true. I didn't find one immediately when I looked for her. But there are some videos, including her reading a short story that had won a prize that you can find. It also is about mothers and daughters. So that seems to be a theme, at least in these two stories, that she's really interested in. And then also there's a Zoom recording that has to do with the Commonwealth Prize, where she's one of the featured speakers that you can take a look at on YouTube. And she's probably elsewhere, but that was just kind of a quick look around for information about her. But I think she's a writer to watch, and I think there's a lot of really interesting things at work in this story that maybe she's in the process of kind of turning into a fuller length work down the road somewhere. I know we probably want to give our listeners and viewers a break and start to wrap things up a bit here. Let me come back to you, Grant, for any final thoughts before we hit stop record.
I don't know what to say. I guess to come back to AI, if you use it, do so carefully. This would be my recommendation. Don't lose sight of your own vision for their vision. It's just, it's a tool, but it's not. It is an imperfect tool in so many ways. So maintain your own artistic integrity is my point.
Yeah, I mentioned that a couple of episodes ago that one of the universities I teach for had this committee and spent months developing an AI policy for the classroom, pages and pages and pages long when they finally disseminated it. But it basically boiled down to the line they use at the end of alcohol commercials: please use AI responsibly. That could have been the one sentence instead of the 14 single spaced pages that they sent us or whatever.
Well, and it's hard to real quick. It's hard to be anti AI when your own university on its webpage has Copilot. We have Copilot like for our students to use as a tool. It's right front and center. And so what I mean, this is the reality that I live in as a professor. I mean, it's university is supporting it. I mean, it's there to access. It's not. So anyway.
Yeah. Brady, final thoughts on AI or anything else?
Well, just looking at the taskbar at the bottom of Zoom here, it's an AI companion, and it has 2 stars. It's so good.
Which I've never clicked on, by the way. I don't know what it is.
So who knows what will disappear? Avatars of us will show up and start talking. Or these 3 old guys. Yeah, I think we don't even know what AI is yet. I think it's such it's just starting out. One of the scientists that I was reading the other day, he said it could be 2 years, could be 5, could be 10, could be 50, could be 100. Maybe AI will never be smarter than us. But I think pretty shortly it will be, and what the implications of that, we don't have any idea. I don't.
Well, the only thing about AI is it can't be forward thinking, because it's all the thoughts that have fed the lake of all these other writers. So it's always about the past and taking the past and then use it. to a logical jump forward. Whereas so many great thinkers in our culture have a vision. You know, Oppenheimer was forward thinking in some ways. You know, he did an incredible quantum leap in thinking. Einstein, you know, AI can't do that. So that's maybe that's something to be a glimmer of hope about this.
All right. Well, we'll end on a glimmer of hope then. So thanks, guys. I'll be in touch regarding your various books as we hopefully get those out in the world very, very soon. And we'll be back together in about a month or so. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate our listeners and viewers. And we will see you down the road.